are stories about? You can challenge, I think, that assumption that stories are about anything or one thing at all. But people make stories, and more often than not, people make stories for a reason. Stories have a purpose. Even if a story has many points and many meanings, it's usually about something beyond the events in the story itself. And if stories are about something, then they're kind of strange, because surely it would be easier to just say the thing than to tell a much longer story about it. For example, telling a child, "Don't lie," sure takes a lot less time than the boy who cried wolf. And yet, for some reason, we tell stories. We humans are storytellers. And maybe this sounds too artsy-fartsy for you to have any meaning so far, but I promise you are still a storyteller. You know how to tell people the stories of your life that shaped you into who you are. Those stories you know and lived make deeper and more profound meaning than whatever the plot of the story is about. We can tell the truths we know in our heads, but stories move that truth to our hearts so we can experience it and act on it. When we look for the meaning in stories, we look at different levels of the story. For example, my favorite author in series, Lord of the Rings by Tolkien, who I haven't talked about in a while, so my quota is still good. The plot of Lord of the Rings is this: a middle-aged hobbit's uncle found an evil lord's cursed ring, and they need to destroy it, or the evil lord will take over the world, especially the hero's home. So what is it about, though? The journey to destroy the ring? How does the meaning change when we understand what's going on at the time about who was writing the book and who it was being written to? One of the things that made the author Tolkien angriest was when people would make one-to-one comparisons between his writings and what they thought the story should be about the real world. Sauron equals Hitler. The people fighting him are the Allies. The ring is a nuclear bomb, etc. It drove him absolutely nuts. And yet, his stories were written after he left his beloved countryside home with 3 close companions, expecting to go on a great adventure at war and returning scarred. He wrote the books, at least in part, to his son, who was serving in the British military on the eve of World War II, and watched the rise of evil, wrote through the war, and was published in the aftermath. And so in one sense, the story is about the plot, about a bunch of small people wanting to destroy a big ring. But in understanding what was going on, the story was about something else. Against a real-world backdrop of people developing worse and worse weapons to use for evil and destroying the natural world to do so, Tolkien wrote a story where the heroes are the people who love simple living so much that they would risk anything to save it. A story where the greatest military power the good guys have is ultimately sacrificed as a distraction to give the little hobbits just a bit more time to destroy the greatest weapon in the world rather than use it. There's the plot, what's going on, but then there's what the story means and what it means to its readers. That at time of great power and great evil, the small acts of kindness would be what made the real difference. There might not be one-to-one comparisons, but it was about something that Tolkien thought his audience needed to hear. So what then are stories about? Well, I would say all stories, on some level, are really about the people who are reading them. How do they interact with that? What do they learn from it? So what then is our strange story today about? Elijah being taken up into the whirlwind. There's an easy answer. It's the first line of the text. Now when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind. Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Oh, it's that story. One that spun off whole traditions and other stories. There's a defining image in this story. Elijah standing in the wilderness, clouds swirling, chariots of fire in a firestorm, descending down, plucking him up, sweeping him off to heaven. Never mind that it's a whirlwind and not chariots that actually pick him up in the text. From this story, we have Jewish traditions of messianic expectations that Elijah will come back someday and prepare the way for the Messiah, as we interpret John the Baptist having done. We got leave a chair out for Elijah at Passover. You never know when he's going to show up. Always keep hope. Beyond that, there's plenty of art. We've got the movie Chariots of Fire, which was inspired by a poem, inspired by the scripture. We've got the famous hymn, Swing Low, Sweet Chariots, and the joke from The Office that ruined that song for me. We've got a story about Elijah being taken up to heaven. That is the plot of the story and some of the things that came from it. Well then, if we've got the purpose of the story, who's the story being written to? That helps us discern the meaning, what the story is about. We know the story is set during the monarchy period of Israel and Judah. David has already killed Goliath and become king. Solomon has risen and fallen. The kingdom is split in half and is headed towards disaster. We are well in the pattern of so-and-so king ruled for so many years and did evil or good, but mostly evil in the eyes of the Lord. But that's only when the story came about. That's not really when it was written down and given to people, at least not in this form. The stories in this form, in this big chunk of the Bible from Deuteronomy through the end of this book that tell the history of Israel was finished during the exile, after the kingdoms had collapsed, after everything the people thought was true about God had seemingly failed. They believed God would never let them fall, but now they were strangers in a strange land. Eventually, some found success, but for the most part, and definitely at first, they were the lowest of low-class citizens, basically slaves, forced to work in agricultural communes. Life was hard and brutal. To them, the authors and editors of this book wrote their version of the story. They would say, hear the word of the Lord, you people who were destroyed and abducted. Hear a story about how one time there was this cool prophet, Elijah, who God brought up to heaven in a chariot of fire. Okay, back to work. Enjoy your day. If I were an exiled Israelite situation, facing no way out, that might just be the fastest story to make me angry. I can't imagine someone would want to tell a story about a miraculous escape like that to these people stuck in their situation. Also, I'm no storytelling expert, but it does seem strange to spoil the climax of the story in the opening line. Foreshadow it, sure, maybe there was some glowing lights in the cloud at one point. Hint at it, great. But completely spoil the ending? That's strange. And the way the author says it, almost like his audience already knows the story. Like I can just say The Boy Who Cried Wolf, and we know what story it is without needing me to tell the whole thing. I mean, if you were telling a story about Elijah being taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire, you would build up to it, create some drama. Here it's almost like the author says, now when the boy was about to cry wolf, this other thing happened. You know the story of Elijah being taken up by the whirlwind, but this is what I think was going on, what its purpose is. A purpose shaped by our situation, a purpose that God has inspired me to share. The first part of the opening line, now when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, is the backdrop. That's the set dressing. What the story is about comes next. Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. This is a story about Elijah and Elisha's journey. This isn't a story about Elijah going away. I mean, it is, but the something is more than that. It's about Elisha after Elijah has gone. It's a story about how the author thinks the Israelites can handle their own transition and exile. First, Elijah leads Elisha on a rather pointless journey. To translate it to our setting, Elisha and Elijah were on their way from Frisco, and Elijah said, "Stop here. I need to go to Weatherford, way out on the other side of Fort Worth." And Elisha went with him, and as soon as they got there, Elijah said, "Stay here. I need to go to Plano." "Elijah, there is a much faster way to go from Frisco to Plano. Why are you dragging me around from place to place for no reason?" Maybe there was no reason. But if the story is about Elisha and how the Israelites can learn from him, then we see how Elisha responds to his mentor, his parental figure, the one who went before him, that 3 times Elijah tells him to stay put, to stop trying, to stick it out wherever he is, to leave Elijah, to walk away from the hard path of serving God. And 3 times Elisha says, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." Maybe Elijah is testing Elisha. Maybe Elijah just doesn't actually like Elisha very much. Maybe Elijah wants to spare him from the hard life of speaking God's words in a world that doesn't want to listen to God. We don't know why. But because of Elisha, we know what to do. Elisha clings to Elijah wherever he goes. He holds on to the people of faith that have gone before him. He holds on to his heritage for as long as God lives, which is forever. Unlike the people who led Israel into exile, Elisha remembers his faith ancestors, his heritage, and he'll be loyal to his faith no matter what. And at each of these stops on this seemingly pointless journey, a group of prophets talk to Elisha. "You know the Lord will take your master away from you." Maybe they mean Elisha will be in charge. You'll get to make decisions soon. Maybe it was supposed to be enticing, tempting even, for Elisha to be excited about it. Or maybe they meant, "Elisha, you should be in despair and grief. Why are you not anticipating this painful change?" We don't know exactly what they meant. It's kind of a strange expression in Hebrew, but we know how Elisha responded. He said, "Yes, I know. Be silent. I'm going to stay rooted in this moment. I'm going to appreciate what I have for as long as I have it." He would follow Elijah as long as he could and enjoy what time he had with him. And after Elisha is done rebuffing the prophets and Elijah, they find themselves standing on the bank of the Jordan River. And now, for these Israelites who know their stories, the stakes become abundantly clear. Because Elijah took off his mantle and struck the water, and the waters parted and dry land appeared, like Moses at the Red Sea. Moses, the person who brought God's words to the people, Moses who delivered them from captivity in Egypt, and Elijah is crossing the river to the region where Moses died. The dramatic question in the story is not if Elijah will leave. That's been clear since the beginning. It's whether Israel will still have someone to speak God's words to them when he does, if the people will trust God to free them from their current captivity. For the reader, it's a challenge. Will they take the chance to be like Elisha? Only Elijah and Elisha crossed the river, just the 2 of them. And when they had crossed, Elijah had one last test. "Tell me, Elisha, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" Elijah said. And Elisha replied, "Please let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." A double portion. I spent a lot of time in Sunday school. I spent a lot of time in college Bible studies. I spent a lot of time in seminary. I think I have a pretty good idea of what's going on in the Bible. And it is one of the greatest joys that I have in this job when I get to be completely and absolutely wrong. Because here's what I thought this meant. "Elijah, let me have twice as much spirit as what you have. Let me be twice as great as you are." Which would mean that the thing that this story is about is that the exiles need to be bold in asking God for more. You were a great nation once. Ask God for the strength to make yourselves twice as great as you were before. That's a much better story, I think, than, hey, you people stuck in exile, this other guy got a free ticket into heaven one time, enjoy your misery. But being twice as great, asking for double the Spirit, that's ambitious, that's overwhelming. That does not sound like my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Still, if that's what God is asking of us, then we will be faithful. But that's not what Elisha asks, because Elisha is quoting Deuteronomy. Let me inherit a double share does not mean twice as much. It means 2/3. The law in Deuteronomy is that if a man has 2 wives and hates one and loves the other, but the elder child is from the one he hates, he still has to divide the inheritance appropriately. 2/3 goes to the heir, period. Elisha is not saying, let me be twice as great as you are. He reveres Elijah as a new Moses. He is utterly humble. He only asks to be worthy to follow in his footsteps. And Elijah tells him, even that is a hard thing, both the calling and the asking, because it is not something that Elijah can give. Only God can. And this is why I think it's such a better story when it wasn't Elisha asking for double. Because only God can empower Elisha to even follow in Elijah's footsteps. That it's not the great burden of expectations on Elisha, but it's what God will do through him. When Elisha picked up Elijah's mantle where it had been dropped, he didn't pick up the burden of being twice as great as Elijah was. He picked up the freedom for God to work through him as he tried to be faithful, as he had for Elijah, Moses, and all God's people. The mantle is not the weight of expectations to be far greater than anyone could expect. Picking up the mantle was just a prayer. God, please, I will follow in his footsteps. Just work through me as you did him. And when Elijah went back to the Jordan, he prepared to part the waters, but he added an extra step. Moses struck the water. Elijah struck the water, but Elisha asked God a question, humble as ever. Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah? Are you there, God? It's me. Just someone trying to follow in the footsteps of those who have gone before, just trying to be faithful. Are you still with me? The waters parted. God was with Elisha when he returned to Israel, and that's what I think the story is really about. Even in exile, Israel would always have people who would speak God's words for them. Even in exile, God would be with them, and if, like Elisha, they treasured their heritage, they stayed rooted in their moment, and they asked only for the strength to be faithful to God's calling, God would lead them back to the promised land. Whatever transition you might be facing in your life, may you face it like Elisha, with humility and love for the faithfulness of the past, even as God leads you to a future greater than you can imagine, not because of our own strength and burden, but because of what God can do. Amen. Please rise, you're able, for our next song.